The meeting of the Citizen Advisory Committee is now in session. According to the agenda, we've got public an area for public comment, and I don't see any, so I'll move on. I would like to hear a motion for summary of action.
So moved.
So Mark Roberts has moved to approve the summary of action. Do I have a second? Second. Richard Means second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so it's passed. General business. Incidentally, we do have a quorum, so I'd like to make a comment on that, and I will later on at the end of the meeting. And please check your attendance log and ensure that you are being properly recorded as either present or not for the various meetings that we've had. No comments, okay. Please check the meeting calendar. And please check the roster to ensure that your name and contact information is current and accurate. Okay. We have on the agenda a report, and the report is on the coordinated call for projects, the One Bay Area Grant and the Measure J Transportation for Livable Communities and Pedestrian Bicycles and Trail Facilities. So with that, I would want to ask, when you give the presentation, do you want us to wait and ask questions at the end, or is it acceptable for us to ask questions while you're presenting?
I think it would be fine if you ask questions as we go along.
Okay, thank you. So I'll leave it to you now.
Thank you, Chair. And good evening, everyone. We're having issues with microphones, you've been told, and I had a meeting last Thursday and they kept cutting out. It's quite annoying. Anyway, I'm here tonight to talk about what we're calling the coordinated call for projects. There are 3 different funding sources that we've released a call for projects for. That was on September 23rd of last month. There's a federal program called the One Bay Area Grant. It's the second cycle of it, so they're calling it OBAG 2. There are also 2 Measure J programs, the Transportation for Livable Communities and the Pedestrian Bicycle and Trail Facilities programs. Altogether, there's about $91.5 million available. It's a fair chunk of change. The majority of it is the federal money that's available through OBAG 2. Another fair amount, 28 million about, is available through the TLC program, and the final 7.6 million is available through the PedBike Trails program. Note in the footnote, there's an additional 3.6 million that's allocated separately. It goes to the Park District for maintaining and improving paved regional trails. So let me talk a bit about OBAG 2. It's by far the most complicated and frustrating, yes, and it's not just the federal part of it, which is complicated enough. It's the MTC part. The purpose of, excuse me, the purpose of OBAG 2 is to integrate the region's federal transportation program with California's climate statutes and the Sustainable Community Strategy, and to implement the goals and objectives of the Regional Transportation Plan, which includes the SCS. And a number of these requirements and components of the OBAG program flow from the SCS and the Regional Transportation Plan. The first one, it particularly, which is the 70% minimum grant amount that has to go to PDAs. It's actually more complicated than that. It's the local streets and competitive portion 70% have to be spent to support priority development areas in Contra Costa. The average grant has to be at least $500,000. Can be smaller. We're going to need some ones that are bigger. They're same eligible project types as last time: bike ped, local streets, safe routes to school, plans, transit improvements. There are a number of requirements that jurisdictions have to meet to be eligible for the funding. There are the complete streets requirements, housing elements, and there are a number of delivery and eligibility requirements that come from MTC and the federal government. There's some new things. One is there's a specific set aside of funding for safe routes to school and for what's known as federal aid secondary, which I'll talk a bit about more later. There are some new eligibility requirements. The complete streets requirements a bit more stringent, and there's also a surplus land resolution, which I'll talk a bit about as well. And then there are some revised factors that we have to use to select projects. And most controversially, perhaps, is the new housing anti-displacement requirements that we have to meet. So these new factors that we have to use, none of them have to do with the project themselves. They have to do with the area that the project's located in, its context. So we're supposed to direct the funds we get through OBAG to high-impact project areas that either have had or are forecast to have significant housing growth, dense job centers that are near transit or housing, improved transportation for all income levels, projects that are in what are called COCs, or communities of concern, which are areas with higher minority, low income, households with no cars, communities. PDAs with effective affordable housing policies, projects that help public health, and PDAs that are near freight transit and what are known as CARE communities, which is an air district designation. The new requirement, and that it's caused some consternation, is, and this is a quote, CMAs, that's the authority, must adopt a specific scoring methodology for funding allocation to projects within PDAs or transit priority areas that rewards jurisdictions with the most effective housing anti-displacement policies. Now, this language, which is somewhat strangely worded, was added at the very last meeting where MPC considered OBAG funding. So it's part of the reason why it's somewhat strangely worded, but it was a big issue, and this is it's the result of some compromising among the members of the commission. Yes.
I have a comment regarding that, and is that more in line with viewing affordable housing so that when projects are built in an area where people can't afford and or displaced from that, the keeping in mind that they need to ensure that they're not pushing a certain group out of the area?
That's the basic idea, that as development occurs in the region, that it occurs in the way that people aren't displaced from their homes, especially lower income communities or more vulnerable communities. And this slide shows the increase in average rents for different types of units within the Bay Area since 1990. And you can see that increase over the last 26 years is pretty substantial. And I know the city of Concord is now considering rent control, at least for a short time period.
Are those numbers mostly focused in the San Francisco area, or?
It's the Bay Area.
Okay.
And UC Berkeley has a program called the Urban Displacement Project, and they surveyed jurisdictions in Contra Costa and looked at a number of different potential housing displacement policies that one could have. Rent control is only one of them. Wanted subsidies or condo conversion, those types of policies. And you can see that some have not many, and some have a fair number. There were 14 listed in the survey. And San Ramon and Concord have the most of them. Now, Measure J, there are two programs. The purpose of the TLC program is to support local efforts to achieve more compact mixed-use development and development that is pedestrian-friendly or linked into the overall transit system. And there are a number of different projects that could be funded with that funding, plans and studies, projects including bicycle, pedestrian improvements, ped improvements, transit improvements, or other improvements that support compact mixed-use districts or encourage walking or bicycling or transit use. The purpose of the PBTF program is to complete projects that are in the countywide bicycle and pedestrian plan. And that's, you can fund all phases of it: design, environmental, right-of-way purchase, as well as construction. But something has to be built at the end of the process. The approach is that we have 3 programs and a number of sub-programs, but just one application. So jurisdictions can apply for one or all of the programs through this one application. Every application has to include a project description, a schedule, who to talk to about the project, what are the costs, what's the milestone schedule. And there are different funding plans for OBAG or the Measure J programs. And there are different screening and scoring questions that an applicant will have to answer depending on what program they apply for. So there's some detail on the OBAG funding. There's altogether $56 million. Some of it goes to the authority. That's the CMA planning and outreach. That's about $4.4 million, $4.3 million. That's for us to do our countywide plan, for us to monitor and carry out the OBAG program, and do a number of other things. There's a specific amount set aside for Safer to School. There's a specific amount set aside for federal aid secondary. There's an amount that we've decided to set aside for local streets and roads preservation that will be allocated by formula to the jurisdictions. And then the remainder, about $18 million, will be a competitive program. Now, I mentioned 70% of the local streets money and the competitive program money have to go to projects in or near priority development areas. And we did a survey earlier, and that suggests that we'll meet that 70% share. We did last time. We were over 80%. But it really will depend on what projects your jurisdictions will submit. We may have to do some work at the end to make sure that we do meet that 70% requirement. I mentioned some of the eligibility requirements. I'll go through them in a bit more detail now. Every jurisdiction has to have a certified housing element, and currently everyone does have a certified housing element, so we can check that one off the list. The complete streets requirement is either your jurisdiction has updated your general plan to comply with the Complete Streets Act of 2008 and done so after January 1st of 2010, And there are some jurisdictions who have done that. Or you have to adopt a complete streets resolution that says you're going to do certain things to make sure that when you do a project of lots of different types that affects a street, then you consider the needs of all different users of that street. Everyone has to have a pavement management program. Everyone does, though not all of them are currently certified, so may be an issue. You have to provide 11.47% local match for your, I'm not sure why 11, I've never been able to figure out why it's that specific number. I'm sure someone does. It may have something to do with how much it costs to park cars in Washington, D.C. Then you have to be an eligible sponsor, and the project has to be eligible. And there's a new requirement. There was a change to the Surplus Land Act, the States Act, in 2014. And jurisdictions, well, non-charter cities need to adopt a resolution that says basically that you will comply with that state law. The authority board found that to be unnecessary and that you don't need to pass a resolution to say that you'll comply with state law. It is state law. And instead are suggesting that there be a checklist and you just have a box that you can check to say that you understand what the law is and that you will comply with it. We've sent a letter off to MTC about that. I'm not sure what will happen. I'm guessing we'll still have to do a resolution, or your jurisdictions will have to. I mentioned that CMA planning, we get some money and it carries out our CMA planning functions. The Safe Route to School, this time around, every region, just as in OBAG 1, will get a share, and the regional transportation planning committees will decide which projects or programs to fund. Mostly it's been projects, better crosswalks or signals that have that can be pedestrian activated near schools. There's one on Oak Grove that was funded last time with the Safe Routes to School in Concord for Safe Routes to School last time in OBAG 1. West County will get $881,000, for example.
I have a question about
Yes.
that. So it says that formula is based on the 50% population and 50% enrollment. Mm-hmm. And is that K through 12?
Yes, it's K through 12.
So there are more enrolled children in the East County than there are in the West County.
I don't have the exact numbers. I think that's accurate, though. There are more people in East County generally than in West County. Mm-hmm. And interestingly, there's a fair amount of Southwest County is getting more money than West County, and that's mostly due to the enrollment, not the population. There's a fair amount of school enrollment, especially in San Ramon.
So what can affect this significantly is truancy.
Truancy doesn't play into it. It's just who happened to be enrolled at the beginning of the school year. It's not attendance, it's enrollment. As long as you're enrolled, you get counted, even if you don't go to school on a regular basis. We hope that you do.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Federal aid secondary, will go directly to Contra Costa County because it has to be spent on rural roads in rural unincorporated Contra Costa. The local streets and roads, just as in last time, there are two sources of funding. One of them is called STP, or Surface Transportation Program funding. It can be used for a number of different purposes, including repaving your streets. So last time we decided to use all the leftover STP funds for street maintenance, and we're going to do the same thing this time. There was some discussion about what formula we should use, but we used the MTC formula last time, and we decided to use the MTC formula this time as well. We did ask jurisdictions to update their information, which we did, and there were some changes to the allocation. Antioch, for example, got quite a bit more money because they updated their information. The competitive is about 18 million available. You can request no less than 400,000 and no more than 4.5 million. Each subregion will get their top scoring project. And as I mentioned before, the criteria are based on MTC's required factors, as well as what the project does. And here the criteria are, I'm not going to go through all of them, but the context criteria come straight out of MTC's factors, and they focus on things that MTC says we need to consider, including housing anti-displacement policies. And then the authority added a number that address what the project does. Will it improve safety? Will it provide increased connectivity for bicyclists or pedestrians or transit? Will it encourage people to walk, bicycle, or use transit? Is it well defined? Will somebody be around to maintain it? Will it remove constraints? Is the project ready to go? And that one we gave 8 points to because it's so important. With federal money, if you don't meet the deadlines, you lose the money, the county loses the money. So we don't like that. We want the money to stay here. Yes?
So while I was reading this, with the housing anti-displacement policies, and how does that fit into affordable housing, and how does that, if at all, reconfigure the equation for affordable housing?
That's a complicated subject. The idea is, well, there's a kind of tension in the discussion. As I showed you the graphs about increased rents. Well, those increases in rents are forcing people to leave San Francisco to go to Oakland, and people in Oakland to leave Oakland to go to Central County, and people in Central County to leave there to go to East County. Or just, yeah, gentrification is part of it. Rents and the price of housing goes up, then people have to move. And the concern that a lot of groups have raised is how can we develop and accommodate this increased growth that we're expecting, 850,000 new people by 2040, which is a fairly substantial increase. We'll be over 7 million in the region by then. Where are we going to put those people, and are we going to force people to leave their communities during that process? And is there a way to allow people whose jobs are in San Francisco, for example, to live in San Francisco, or the people whose jobs are here in Central County or in West County to stay in those areas, despite the rising rents? So on the one hand, if you're a capitalist, you will say, well, the problem is there's not enough supply. So what we need to be doing is creating more supply. But if you're on, I won't say an opposing side, but you have a different perspective on the issue, you might say, well, how do we keep a housing that exists now affordable for the people who live there? rent control is one way to do it, but that's not the only way. And there are subsidies. There are ways of providing density bonuses to developers if they provide affordable housing as part of their development. There's a question then of how much is too much to require. What about inclusionary housing? Is that a good way to provide that affordable housing where the need is? So there are it's a very complicated and very difficult issue to address.
Yeah, branching off Yolanda's point, as I was reading the program guidelines for the One Bay Area grant, it says the purpose of OBAG program is to, number one, reward jurisdictions that accept housing allocations through the RHNA process and produce housing. So, RHNA tries to focus on those low-income housing and try to identify those needs and, of course, try to get the communities to actually produce those low-income housing. So looking at the scoring model here, I was interested to notice that, any points allocated to the RHNA process, there was only 4 points out of a total of, 40, 50 points. It's just a small part of it, and yet it's one of the 3 main purposes of OBAG. So I was wondering if you could explain kind of why there's such a small focus on it, even though it's one of the 3 main purposes of OBAG.
Well, it's the purposes that are described in OBAG. Well, I mentioned the purpose. Let me go back further. Early on, I mentioned the purpose of OBAG. It's to integrate the region's federal transportation program with the climate, to address climate change. And there's certain requirements in SB 375 that MTC has to demonstrate that it's going to, with its plans and its transportation investments, reduce greenhouse gas emissions up to at least a certain level. And one of the ways it does that is by encouraging development in different areas. The housing anti-displacement I would say, isn't an essential component. I'm sure that housing anti-displacement advocates would disagree with my take on it, but it is not an essential part of OBAG. But it is a current concern that OBAG is trying to address, because if you try to accommodate that growth and put new development in areas that are accessible to transit and that are walkable and bikeable, you may end up gentrifying those locations, pushing out, creating housing that's unaffordable, and thereby pushing existing residents to other locations. The Mission District in San Francisco is an example of that process. So the housing anti-displacement, I wouldn't say is the primary focus of OBAG, but I do know that other advocates disagree with that. But it is something that's intended to try to address the consequences of developing in the region. So yes, it's 4 points out of 100. It's not a huge number, but there are some other criteria that also address that community's concern, forecast housing growth. Projects are directed to those areas, job centers near transit, and some of these other criteria also potentially benefit lower income communities. The Measure J TLC, it's going to be allocated to the RTPCs by formula, as that's required in Measure J. West County gets about 11.2 million. Central County gets almost 10 million. Southwest gets 7.6 million. You will notice there's no East County money, and that's because they allocated their money earlier, far in advance, to eBART. So there is money, but it's all going to eBART. And because we've been able to find some additional money for eBART and other improvements out in East County, I think in 2023, fiscal year 2023, there will be some funding available through TLC for East County. But it's a bit in the future.
Would that be to continue eBART to phase 2?
That's a potential. That money, that East County could say, well, we've got this money. We used the earlier money for eBART. Let's use later money for extending eBART to Brentwood, say. Mm-hmm. That is a possibility. Also, we are going to be went too far. We're asking that the regional committees give us a prioritized list that's 125% of what their share is. For example, it's let's say Central County, because the math's easy, $10 million. Then we're going to ask them to submit $12.5 million worth of projects, and I'll explain why later. The PBTF, that gets reviewed by our Countywide Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee, and they'll also have a prioritized list of projects. So the process is we're going to get these applications. We're going to try to fund as many projects as we can, and we're going to try to minimize the number that we fund through OBAG, because to get the federal funds, you have to go through a process called local assistance. Some people might say that that's a misnomer, but actually, because it's so cumbersome and time-consuming. But the people who work in local assistance really do try to help go through that process. But there are a number of requirements, some of which MPC places on the money. A lot of it comes from FHWA, the Federal Highway Administration, which puts on a lot of its own requirements, and there are a lot of requirements in the state law and the federal law as well. So we're going to try to minimize the number of projects and sponsors that have to go through that process. And the schedule is, we released a call for projects. The applications are due in December. If you think you've got some projects in your jurisdiction, or if you know some groups that have a project that you think your jurisdiction should be looking into, contact your staff now, because I know they're already considering projects.
I'm Roseanne Nieto from Concord, and our Naval Weapons Station project has allocated 25% of it to low-income housing. And I would hate to see us deemed, because we haven't applied for this money, oh, well, somebody else can use it, where this could back up Concord's plan in order to do the housing, the low-income housing. The Lennar has not submitted a design yet of the project, but we expect that anytime. The Navy hasn't finished their environmental, of course. And we're expecting to turn over land December of next year. And if I look at the dates of this, they would be too late to really apply for some of the money. Am I right?
Well, the city could apply for a project, but my guess is they will ask Lennar or whoever does the actual development to provide all the facilities. Well, and I know that the plan does require bicycle and pedestrian facilities to be developed as part of the street design.
This project, the first phase is about 4,000 homes. It's about 4,000 homes. We're expecting about 12,000 apartments and single-family homes and from the whole gamut. So can we possibly submit for funding before we process down the road, or are we going to be considered secondary needs? That's what I'm getting at. Is it, are we going to be equitable with everybody, or you're going to get the money from so and so, or the lender, or the builder, whoever, and put aside our needs? And our needs, I mean, you saw that chart on Concord and displaced. I mean, it's going on. It's a major problem. It's there in front of our city council every week about displaced people that are in our community. And they are getting wild. I mean, these little ladies get up there that don't even speak English and just tear our city council apart, which they deserve. They've kind of pushed this problem to one side and haven't addressed it in a long time because of the weapons station. We kept hearing, when the weapons station comes on, it's going to solve this problem. Well, the problem is just growing and growing. It's got far exponential over what we're getting from the Lennar. And that concerns me, that are we going to be a player with this money?
Well, the city of Concord, I will say, did very well last time in OBAG 1 at getting projects. For example, the project on Detroit, that was funded through OBAG 1. There's another project that hasn't occurred yet, a last mile project that's on Clayton Road. I think part of it's on Willow Pass too, in downtown near the BART station.
Yeah.
So what I think the focus will not be on the naval weapons station. It'll be on other existing areas within Concord and within other cities as well.
Oh, that's good. I can see that happening along Monument, and we need some help along that corridor.
Will there be an OBAG 3? How often do these come up?
OBAG 1 was released in 2012 or 2013. I'm trying to remember these. I think 2013 is when we submitted our project, and it was supposed to be a 4-year period, but they ended up extending it to a 5th year. This call for projects is, let me see, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 6 years. So part of the problem is that the federal government Congress has not been very, well, one could say not very functional, at coming up with any kind of program for anything. And certainly not for transportation. It took a long, long time to come up with a re-upping of the Federal Transportation Act. So a lot of it's going to depend on what Congress does, because this is federal money and they have to go through the process of providing that funding.
In your handout, you make note of there will be a workshop for potential sponsors, but I don't see any schedule here for that.
That's right. It was last Thursday. It was after our technical coordinating committee meeting. It was fairly well attended. It was meant to be for people who would actually fill out the applications. So a lot of city staff I'm trying to think. Yes, Lafayette, Walnut Creek. I'm not sure if someone from San Ramon. I think so. I know someone from Pleasant Hill was there. Contra Costa County staff was well represented.
Concord?
Yes, someone from Concord was there. Ray Kuzbari. And no, I'm not sure I saw anyone from Marinda. I know someone from town of Danville was there.
I guess I'm confused. All the stuff in here says draft on it everywhere, and yet the schedule says that everything was released on September 23rd. Is that true? Has the city's already received all this?
Yes, they have. They have received.
So,
I have to make a few corrections and additions that I'm working on now. But yes, there is an updated one. It's essentially this. It's very, very, very close to what's in your packet.
what's in there? Okay.
And then the numbers are pretty close. The one set of numbers that are different are let's see, what page is it on? It's the shares of the local streets and roads money on page 2.1-40. That's the authority board looked at they decided that the formula, they wanted to review it, and at the same time they wanted to give jurisdictions an opportunity to update their information to make sure it was current. So we gave jurisdictions a week and a half to do it, and they did. And the numbers changed a little bit, not substantially. The biggest change is Antioch got $100,000 more.
So this has already been approved by the board?
Yes. So this is the end of my presentation. We're hoping that on June 21st, the authority board will approve the final package. We'll get recommendations from a subcommittee of the TCC, from the regional planning committees, from our countywide bicycle pedestrian advisory committee, and try to put them all into a package. Jurisdictions or other sponsors can apply for more than one funding program. You could apply for OBAG money, competitive OBAG money, and Measure J TLC, for example, and we'll have to figure out if you get money through both, we have to decide which funding you get to use.
So if everything goes according to schedule, and in June everything is approved, the final lists or the projects are approved, then the funding is immediate, or it's dribbled out, or when would the projects begin? Would they begin in August or September, or they're going to take another year for most places?
Because the money won't be available, all the money won't be available, it comes in annually. We have to program the project. So some projects would be funded early, and for some of the Measure J money, they could be funded pretty much in the next month. The federal ones, everyone has to go through the whole process of applying. It's a complicated process. They have to fill out a number of things. Do you have the right of way? Have you done your NEPA clearance? Have you done this? Have you done that? Have you submitted this? And that usually takes several months to do. But there will be, for the Measure J funding, we could probably get some of the projects going the fall of 2017, not too long after the projects are approved.
So Measure J can be used for, quote, shovel ready in that next August or September, whatever, in there. So this only has like the city of Pleasantdale jumping through the hoops locally. And if they're approved for a project, then they have to go to the feds. to get?
It depends on the
make
funding.
application?
It depends on the funding. If they
Right.
get Measure J funding, the MPC and the feds are out of the picture. So it's much simpler process. And if I were a jurisdiction and I had to choose between the two funding sources, I'd choose Measure J because it is simpler to get the money. It's not without its bureaucratic requirements, but it is the requirements are much fewer. For the OBAG funding, the process is we approve it. The sponsors have to put it into this online database called the Fund Management System, or FMS. Then the projects have to be added to something called this Transportation Improvement Program that MPC puts together. It's going to have all the OBAG funding, all the OBAG projects from throughout the region. Then that has to be approved by the state and the federal government. And then once that's done, then the sponsors can go put together all their funding package, their design, their environmental clearance, their site reviews, their right-of-way certification, all those other bureaucratic things. So they probably wouldn't, and then it has to get approved by the California Transportation Commission. Probably you wouldn't have any of those projects be ready to go until the fall of 2018. So it's sometimes a long process to get your funding and get the project underway.
I remember reading in here somewhere that BART was also an organization that could request OBAG money, but I don't see them in the list of money that was allocated in OBAG once. I was wondering why.
Well, it's you're looking at the local streets and roads preservation table, and for that one, yeah, they are eligible, and they could apply for the competitive OBAG funding. The local streets and roads funding is going to be strictly for local streets and roads, so it just goes to the 20 jurisdictions. I know BART did apply for funding through OBAG 1. I don't know if they're going to apply. They haven't discussed any projects with me yet. East Bay Regional Park, though, I'm pretty sure is going to apply for some Measure J funding.
East Bay Regional Park would apply for Measure J under the pedestrian bicycle.
They could apply for both programs, both the TLC, because that supports transit improvements. They've applied for both programs before. They did get quite a bit of money through the PBTF. They got $1 million last time to help rehabilitate the Carquinez scenic route west of Martinez. It's now, it's been open before, but now it's a much safer place to walk or bicycle. There are some links in here that if you want to see where the priority development areas or where the communities of concern are in Contra Costa, there are some links in here that you can go look at maps online to see where those, and there's some right there too. I forgot about that. Mm-hmm. But if you want to do it in the privacy of your own home, then you can do that.
Under the Measure J for the Livable Communities Program, an eligible sponsor for that would be transit agencies.
Yes, yes,
And
they can apply.
And so I've read throughout the program how important it is to have affordable housing, to be able to either walk or ride to a public transportation so that you can either get home or get to work. And my guess is that the bus companies will be applying for monies through this.
I don't know. I do know that County Connection did get a TLC grant for a study to try, it was called, I forgot the actual name now. It was a study on trying to figure out how they can adapt their routes to changing land use projections in Central County within their service area.
And it states that they need to demonstrate that it leads to changes in travel behavior. And this has just been something that I've been looking at for the last 12 years. Nobody rides those buses. They're empty. So I'm just sitting here thinking, and we continue to give them money. How do we monitor and ensure that the monies that have been allocated to public transit are being used to market, to get those kids to school? I'm at a loss.
Well, we do some evaluation of the routes that we fund, if we fund new routes. And there was a route between Orinda and El Sobrante that ran for a while, and then it didn't run because there weren't enough riders. Though I will say on some routes, for example, the route along Treat Boulevard, there are times when it's fairly full. It's not like riding on a BART car, that's true. But commute times in the afternoon from when people get home from work, that particular bus route is fairly well used.
I would dare say that if there was some sort of marketing, public relations to the various communities, that those buses would be well used. And I'm just connecting the dots. The more you build, the more cars, the more traffic.
That's true. And one of the problems with buses is that they share those congested roadways. So if there's congestion on a road, the bus is stuck in traffic as well.
Right, and yet we are presented with projects that look at buses that have their own lanes to provide more expedient methodology to get from point A to point B. It doesn't do anybody any good if if that's the best kept secret. And it seems to be. And there are a couple of buses that I can't see who's in the bus because thankfully the windows are tinted. But I just need to mention that every time. It really, to me, I think it's, if an agency is going to be allocated money and the wording leads to changes in travel behavior, then perhaps more monitoring of how is that travel behavior being changed, because I don't see it.
Joey, I think that probably Lafayette and Rock and Orinda are the least bus-friendly communities in the county.
And Mark, we are one of the most growing areas. Good luck getting down Mount Diablo Boulevard. Good luck. People are complaining about it. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, then do something about it. Walnut Creek has the free bus shuttle, so do that in Orinda and Lafayette and Moraga. We won't do it. Why is that? Because one will come at 8 o'clock in the morning, the next one will come at 9. I'm not using that. No one is using that. And I think it's wonderful that we have pedestrian and bicycle and sidewalks, I don't see anybody going to Safeway on their bicycle. So for me, that's entertainment, and that's an ability to enhance the look of your community. And I think, bravo, great. Then let's call it that. And so my children used the bus, and then I think I told you this story. And then my youngest came home, and I said, "What are you doing home?" He goes, "The bus didn't come." What do you mean the bus didn't come? Got in the car and drove him to school and got into traffic. Next day I said, "Maybe you missed the bus." Came home. What happened? The bus didn't come. So then I went to County Connection. Oh no, we cut that route out. There were people riding that. So I'd like to hold them accountable. We're giving them money. And for me, if you give me money and you don't hold me accountable, I'm happy camper. I don't have to do anything. But it says here, leads to changes in travel behavior. You're not doing that, so you don't get the money. Next, give it to Concord.
Today I happened to go down to an opening of a grocery store. Cash and Carry has taken over the Osh hardware space on Monument. And as I'm driving down Monument, our bus stops are being used. And now with Cash and Carry in there, and you see women out with their bags going into there and taking the bus. But we have a neighborhood that isn't integrated very well into our community, which makes me a little irritated. But they are using the facilities that the city does provide for them. But it's tough. You saw where our problem is in housing. They don't want to move out on Clayton Road, be out there. All their friends, their work, most of their work is in that area. And, you know, you talk about displacement and you don't want to move them out to Clayton. They don't go there. And we running out of land to build affordable housing. And we are putting in, I think, 2 new apartments downtown. That's right there at Toda Santa Square, which I'm hoping, you know, near a Safeway, new apartment places. I don't know what the rent's going to be.
Affordable.
I hope so. So,
No.
but I see people go down Clayton Road with the number 10 bus and hardly use it. It just depends on the neighborhood. You guys don't have to worry about that as much, although your help in your homes and your yards and things like that are coming from Monument Boulevard in Concord.
I think we don't need to worry about that currently today in La Miranda. We keep building baby mausoleums in Moraga. We're going to have to worry about it.
Okay, I think you're right.
We're not going to be able to get through the roads there. And in supporting the infrastructure, then, you know, we're looking at taxes, and it's, you know, it's just a mad cycle. I can't turn this off, sorry. I've been trying. Won't turn off. Other comments?
The Cubs are winning.
No? If not,
Yolanda, I do want to say something. Our frustration in the Far East County, I feel like we live in Asia. They finally have stopped calling it that. But, you know, we have issues too, and that's why if we don't pass Measure X, we are not going to make it in Contra Costa County. I live on a little country road called Camino Diablo in Byron, and 19,000 cars a day go right by my house. Okay. We have no bus service. We have no BART. And there are, am I right, 13,000 people who live in Discovery Bay. And they go right by my house. So, I mean, building more, I mean, this OBAG and Measure J sounds wonderful. You know, we're hoping to build in Byron a senior center. And it'd be wonderful to have BART out there. It'd be wonderful to have e-BART, buses. I understand when BART started, we did have a bus out there, but they stopped it because nobody was using it. But, you know, if we don't look ahead, and what you're talking about, you know, building affordable, I think that is the most misused word in our county at this time. But if we don't get Measure X, I don't know what we're going to do. Yeah.
Speaking of, oh, sorry.
I'm going to shut mine off.
Speaking of Measure X, is there any sense, have there been any polls? Is there any, where are we with that?
I have not been privy to those. The staff has tried to, and legally, we're required to keep a real firewall between what we do during, as staff for the authority, once the authority put it on the ballot. I mean, afterwards, after work, as a private citizen, we can say, please vote for this, or, you know, don't waste your time. We could say either of those two things as private citizens. But as staff people, we can only give unbiased information, and we're not actually doing the polling for the measure itself now. Someone is. It's just not us.
I know that our city council has sent out flyers that fill up your mailbox in support of this because, and you know, talking about East County, we were in the middle of the weapons station. I've been with that project for 10 years, if I ever get it built. But we had somebody from Antioch to come in and talk to us and telling us not to do anything because it impacts Antioch so much. Well, wait a minute. Where do those cars go through? They go down Willow Pass Road, they get on Highway 4, and they go to Antioch, don't they? And so we're impacted with all the new building that goes out into your area. So it's kind of a battle that we're both facing, and neither one of us is willing to pull up stakes and say, let's stop this. Let's stop the development of 13,000 homes. Let's stop the development of the Naval Weapons Station. You know, nobody's willing to put their name on anything like that. Oh, you know. And it's a nightmare that's going to happen in about, I imagine, 3 years. It's going to blow sky high. We're going to have the first phase of the weapons station under construction or built, and includes affordable housing, and we're trying to attract people that would go to Antioch in the affordable housing package. I don't know what we're going to do, you guys. It's a nightmare. And there's no answers. We're sitting here wondering what, and we can't do anything. We don't have any quote-unquote power. Lay our bodies out on Highway 4 or dig a trench around Byron. I don't know. It's frightening. It really is frightening what we're doing to our country, what we're doing to our county.
Well, according to OBAG, the program rewards jurisdictions that accept housing. And the second part is housing, and the third part is housing. You don't get your money unless you've been building. That's one of the things we do when we look at our checklist, and that comes from ABAG. We don't have a choice. They're telling us if you don't do it, then your particular city will not get the money. And I personally can't sit here and say, well, no to the city of Lafayette. I just can't do that. So therefore I say yes, and it passes. And even if I said no, it would still pass. Everybody here could say no to it. It would go to the authority and it would still pass. That's the realization. That's the reality. And affordable housing is based on what calculation? And no one's, bring it up. And so how do we recalculate that? Not willing to do it, so.
I also work on a committee with the housing, East Bay Housing Organization, and with Save Mount Diablo. And there's a group, a lot of unions are involved. It's an incredible, diverse group that really talks to each other. But it's frightening, too, when I see right now affordable housing giving their push onto the weapons station. I don't know. I keep telling these guys, it says, there's no more room. There's no more room for housing. You just, you're pushing and pushing all the time. I don't
I've got
know.
6,000 feet in my backyard. I could put a couple units in. I wouldn't mind doing it either.
Well,
But I will, if I could, I'd note that over the last decade, for every 8 new jobs we've added 1 new house. And we are just not keeping up as a region with the amount of economic growth that's occurring. It is not particular to the Bay Area. And in fact, there are parts of the region, parts of the country that are worse. Seattle and Portland both are. Portland and Seattle have the highest appreciating markets in the U.S. right now. And it's because they're not, and they're trying to keep up with the demand, but they're not. And if we don't provide housing, and it's not just affordable housing, and it doesn't even need to be entirely affordable. It's just increasing the supply. And if there's enough supply, then the demand or the amount that you can charge for your unit will go down, which is bad for me because I'd like to have my.
I think
my
part of the
house.
problem, maybe we should just, is that we've allowed Silicon Valley to develop in Silicon Valley instead of pushing some of the businesses out into the East Bay or bringing more work-oriented, business offices and things like that within our own community. Everybody. I drove into San Francisco for 30 years to my job. Why couldn't I come down, tweet, and get a job with these people? I don't know. I don't know what we're going to do.
Well, part of our goal for State Route 239, which is the airport connector, which will hopefully alleviate Camino Diablo when we put that in. They are looking, because the airport has a real potential for transportation, for businesses, that whole little stretch there. And don't forget, if we can build that up, there's lots of jobs out there. There's lots of businesses could be out there right next to the airport. It's perfect. And those people are going to commute to Tracy and Stockton to work as well. So, when you're saying Silicon Valley is a problem, well, our development is going to have to be out to the airport connector. And it has a lot of potential out there. Like I said, it's up to Measure X. State Route 239 has been on the books in Contra Costa County to be built since 1959.
You have a ready labor force out there, so it's all the makings for success. Other comments? You put a lot of effort and time into this report. I want you to know that we read it, so you don't feel that you didn't. And we're very grateful for you coming in and explaining this to us. So you can see we have a few little areas of passion. And so we'll be interested to see how this evolves.
I can come back later and let you know and give you an update on it.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you. Is
You're
that all right
welcome.
with everyone? Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Okay, so the next on the agenda is reports. Who has a report for the group? No? Okay. Comments. I have a couple of comments. I would like the group, or Diane, in name of the group, to write a letter of thank you to Richard Evans for his time on the committee. He has retired his service, so Richard was the representative for the city of Martinez. So is that all right with everyone? Do I need to have a motion on that? No? Okay, thank you. Also, just a reminder, if you are not going to be able to make a meeting, you might want to think about calling Diane so that she can write you down as excused absence, because if you don't call, then you will be written down as just absent. So excused absent is better than absent. And for those of you whose terms are expiring, and my term is expiring in December, and I was just viewing who else is expiring. Oh, JP. So if you're interested in remaining with the committee, you would need to contact your city clerk. And what I did is I sent her an email stating that I was interested in remaining with the committee, and I copied Diane. And so then Diane will then take over and give her the necessary information, because this needs to be on the city council agenda.
If I'm not mistaken, depending on how the vote goes.
Right.
this
Well,
might be a
you
vote
know,
issue, right?
it might be, but, yeah, I was thinking that too, and I thought, might as well just do it. So, okay. Just a notation that there is no meeting next month, November. So the next meeting will be December 14th. I will be coming back from my cruise on the Panama Canal. I'll be gone 16 days. I'll be back on the 13th. So if my eyes are crossing and I don't say anything, you'll know why. I'll be sleeping with my eyes open. No, just kidding. So with nothing else, then I hope everyone has a wonderful holiday, Thanksgiving, and I will see you in December. And why won't this shut?